Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Vasant Rao, you were colleagues of the President Abdul Kalam for many, many years.
Yes, we were colleagues and we have worked together, as I mentioned, in 69, 21st of February 69. The first space quality propellant was developed by my group, and Dr. Kalam was the man, he was Mr. Kalam at that time, was the man who took care of the hardware. But since it was a testing of the propellant, we got national level recognition. Mainly because, you see, what happens is, before a propellant goes into flight, it is tested statically. That means the whole rocket motor is held in position, it's not allowed to fly. It's ignited, whatever thrust it develops, it passes on to the thrust plate. And by changes in the structure, the strength of it, by strain gauge you measure what thrust it develops, whatever push it gives back. And only after you do it repeatedly, when you know that it gives the performance as predicted earlier, then only it is allowed to fly. But since the space propellant was being made for the first time, I wanted to know whether it will hold its integrity when it's subjected to very high dynamic conditions of the flight. There, like I said, a few times the velocity of sound, that much of velocity when it takes place, to the dynamic condition the propellant holds good or not. So it is called the dynamic testing. Okay. So 21st February 69, we had that vehicle, a small rocket. It was extremely small rocket. The whole rocket weighed again not more than 10 kilograms. But the importance was, for the first time in the country, we tested a space kind of thing. And Dr. Kalam, he was the one who gave. So it was a joint program of both of us.
I see.
So that was the beginning. Later on, of course, we had many occasions to interact with each other.
So coming back that in 81, SLV3 was launched while you were the director, and you had all the glory and success at your fingertips. And then later 3-4 years, 5 years down the line, you decided to leave ISRO.
Yeah, okay.
How did you arrive at that decision?
I joined, you are right, in 67 April. And when I became the director in 79, mind you, I was the first indigenous director, as it were, because first was Dr. Brahm Prakash, and immediately after Brahm Prakash of the new Vikram Sarabhi Space Center, I was the first one. Indigenous in the sense that I was born and brought up there right from beginning, that kind of thing. So, you see, up to 79, that means from rising in about 12 years' time, starting with a propellant engineer, then I was designated as propellant engineer, by the way.
Okay.
And I did not feel anything about it. We were like aerodynamics engineer. Kalam was aerodynamics engineer. I was a propellant engineering, that thing. Then I became the head of the propellant engineering division. And then I became director of the chemicals and materials group. And then I became the director of the Vikram Sarabhi Space Center. These are 3-4 steps. Within 12 years it occurred. 12 and a half years. Then there was a challenge because SLV3 had failed. The first flight had failed. That was just 2 months earlier, before I took over in November 79. August it happened. 1980 flight was successful when Dr. Kalam was the project director. And mind you, thereafter immediately, the project director was a very young chap called Ved Prakash Sandless. Not many people know it.
Okay.
This is again the beauty of the integrity of the managership. You have Dr. Kalam, and then you have at probably third level in hierarchy, a very young chap but very capable fellow called Ved Prakash Sandless. He took over immediately after the first SLV3 successful flight. Then he was the project director. Okay, the reason I am mentioning it, converting the organization which was recovering the shock of the first failure. You see, after all, when we went to city like Trivandrum, we used to feel what these people think about us, because the government spent so much of money and we had failed. So we used to get that guilty kind of feeling. Everybody was feeling very dejected. that kind of thing. There used to be a lot of talk at the bus stops rather than within. I think it required a lot of change to regenerate the place. And that was my mission when I took over in 79. I think at the height of my struggle, if you like, struggle within, struggle outside, to make sure the organization is galvanized to take on the kind of job. And it happened within 7-8 months, creating a lot of organizational structures, differences, etc., etc. We welded into one again very powerful team, and this SLV3 was successful in 1980. 81 there was under this thing. Really speaking, then the program started for the advanced SLV3, then Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, etc., etc. All these designs were getting ready. And then, this kind of thing, once you have a launch vehicle, once you put a satellite into orbit, once you become one of the 6 nations of the world to be able to launch your own satellite with your own rocket, then it's a question of an ending game.
Yes.
Then you have bigger rocket. To give an example, I started saying rocket when we had the first space propellant 10 kilogram rocket, the whole rocket. SLV3 was 17 tons, 17,000 kilograms. Okay. ASLV was 45 tons. Okay. Then you have PSLV and then GSLV. Now GSLV is 405 tons.
I say. From 10 kilograms to 405 tons.
Right? Now when these kind of steps are now lined up, tomorrow it may be 800 tons and so on. So where do you do? So by the time I got into 1980s, slowly it began to become same of the one, repeat of the same, maybe larger. Organization was properly set up. We had about 6,000-7,000 people. Adjoining establishments were there. Having worked as a director, now successful flights, etc., etc., I began to feel that now I need to sort of recharge my batteries, as it were.
Yeah.
Because by that time, I had worked more than, coming close to 18, 19 years or so. End of 85 or beginning of 86, I thought I wanted to write a book on polymers. Remember, I knew nothing about polymers. I knew nothing about propellant. Slowly, I learnt myself about polymers. I taught polymers to the people who came and joined the establishment. Okay. Now I wanted to write a book on polymers. And I wanted to write, another ambition I had was to write a book on energy, various forms of energy.
Okay.
I had a great interest in that subject. So I went as a visiting professor to Stanford University with the intention of staying there for a couple of years to do both these works. In actual fact, I was there for just about 6-7 months. And then Yashpal, who was the secretary of the DST, moved over to UGC as the chairman, and I was called. So the reason of my leaving was nothing really different, but 18-19 years having worked, change.
To charge the battery.
To recharge my battery. Yes.
Recharge. Vasantrao, this reminds me a story while you said that you wanted to recharge your battery. Lord Kelvin, on whose name the measure in thermodynamics exists, Kelvin, degrees Kelvin.
Yeah.
After teaching for 40 years in the university as a professor, he took the admission for carrying out research again, PhD in the same university.
Oh, really?
And people laughed at him. He said, during 40 years, things have changed to such an extent that I must study again. I must recharge the battery.
Oh, really? I see.
So that is the reference that I was reminded of. But did you fulfill your goal when you went to university?
Only half.
Only half.
My book on polymers was in the advanced stage of completion, but it required really going through the whole of it. Certain portions were maybe about 75-80% was complete, the remaining 20% was required to be written. I could do that job. And by the time I was reading myself for writing on the energy, I was recalled. It was a midnight call.
Before we come to midnight call, when did you complete your book on polymers.
I completed the manuscript, I think in the early part, March, April or so, of 86.
I say.
And the book actually was released by in the Indian Science Congress, which took place in Bangalore in January 87. It was released by the Prime Minister.
Uh-huh.
And it was well worth it. As I said, today it's an extremely popular book. It's in the probably 27th or 28th reprint of it. And every 3 or 4 months there is a reprint. This is what I understand from the publisher. And when I look at it, why it happened the way it did, we are the 3 authors.
Okay.
So what we had done, we had divided the work between the 3 of us. That was number 1. It was not exactly 1/3 that I wrote. Maybe a little less than 1/3, maybe 1/4 portion of it I wrote myself. And the rest of it was divided between the 2 other authors. But my job was to then take the write-up of each of my co-authors and to put it in my language.
Okay.
So that it will look a homogeneous write-up. Now, since I learnt polymers myself, because at no place, I knew polymers to the extent that a chemist would do, right? Or a chemical engineer would do. But that's for one's own understanding a little bit of it, not the entire gamut. But when we are writing on polymer, then firstly it sort of developed from the idea of my own notes, for example. Because I mentioned in the early days of Tumba, we're getting the people, the Keralites who are just BScs, having gone to work in the ordnance factories. Because that was the nearest that we could get to work on the propellant area. Now they did not know anything about polymers. Because it was not very common for polymers to be included in the BSc kind of setup. 3 subjects and what have you. So firstly, myself and 2 or 3 of my colleagues had to prepare notes and give them a sort of classes as it were, because the new fellows coming. So far as I am concerned, I had to learn it myself again and then put it in a manner by which I learned myself. So put it in a very simplified kind of form. In time to come, these notes developed into something really formidable. And since it was a year after year kind of thing, we had a chance to revive, to put it. We knew the difficulties that the boys had, so we had to change it. Over a period of time, then we began to get the MScs, the fresh people, etc. So we had a chance to interact with them to find how the notes would be like. So it really came to form. Unlike any other way of writing the book, this was very different.
I see.
And then when I look why it became so successful, because I find any page you open and you begin to read, and it is written in a rather a lucid form.
I see.
The other taste of it was, of course, that this book is available by John Wiley. It's printed in India in those days by Wileyistan people. But they used to supply a certain number of copies under the brand name of John Wiley. And John Wiley's catalogue of books includes this book.
I say.
Whereas it is available for 50 rupees here, the paperback. These people supply it for 200 rupees to them. And they sell it for $39, some $39.80 or something like that. So at that time it was something like 30 rupees to $1. So maybe for 200 rupees what they bought, they used to sell at 1,239 rupees. So I take it that since this went on for quite some time, language-wise, or lucidity of expression, if you like, seem to have met the requirement of the real English readership also.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was it translated in any other foreign languages?
Yes, it was translated. It was translated in Russian.
Okay.
It was translated in Spanish. And it is translated also in Chinese.
I see.
Yes.
Good. So now we come back to that midnight telephone. Who telephoned you and how did you come back to India?
You see, I mentioned to you that I met as the director of the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. I never met her son, but by the time I was in USA, then of course he had become the Prime Minister, and he was the Minister in charge for Science and Technology also.
Rajiv Gandhi.
Rajiv Gandhi. So the midnight call was the one from, firstly from Yashpal, who told me that, hey, look, I am moving over as the chairman of UGC. And they are sending you invitation to join as Secretary DST.
Okay.
I am calling you specially to tell you that you should not decline it.
Okay. DST is Department of Science and Technology.
Department of Science and Technology. So that was after about something like 7 months
Okay.
after I went there, and that sort of shot about it, if you like, my stay there, which I was planning for 2 years. That was required. But then I checked with my wife. I wasn't very enthusiastic about it for the simple reason that I was probably having stayed there for 6-7 months. I wanted to complete the work on the energy area also. But then my wife said, told me, you see, what happened was when I looked at Secretary DST shape, I wasn't sure whether there is a focus there or not.
Okay.
Having belonged to the space department, having belonged to the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, where people talked in terms of focus. Responsibility, yes, launch vehicle. If something happens in the development of that, or something is not up to the time scale schedule, then ultimately the director is responsible. So the accountability and your work is well planned out. Well, when you talk about science and technology, I wasn't sure. I wasn't too much connected with that earlier. But then my wife said, no, this something is very interesting and you should join. Ultimately, I went by what she said. Not that I was against it, but I wasn't so sure. As I told you, that women are great. They're very wise creatures.
Yes.
Great administrators, great managers. But somehow she had an insight. She said, no, this is something. I mean, she seemed to know more than I did about what science and technology was all about. Subsequently, I found that she was right, and I didn't know enough about it.
How was your regime of 5 years from 86 to 91 as Secretary DST? What did you do there?
Again, I tried to create a focus. 86 to 91, 5 years of secretaryship. I took some time before I understood what the DST was all about. I found that, like I said, from 6,000-7,000 people to now the DST are about 25,000-26,000 people, something of that kind. I did not know about it. DST's image is an organization which sponsors projects. Okay. But only after I went and joined as the Secretary DST, I found out that the whole India Meteorological Department, about 10,000-11,000 people, is a part of the DST. I found out the Survey of India, if not the oldest organization of that kind.
But still it is 200 years old.
It's more than that, yes, quite right. One is 100 years, the other was more than 200 years. That was a part of DST. And because of these two organizations, spread all across the country because of its very nature of work. Besides, of course, they have the autonomous institutions. Like in Pune, for example, Agarkar Research Institute. Or you look at so many other places which are the autonomous institutions of the DST.
Okay.
Calcutta, Indian Association for the Cultivation of Sciences.
Okay.
Is more than 100 years old. Institute of National Importance is a part of DST.
Raman started his work there.
Raman Research Institute.
Yes.
Correct.
But Indian Institute of Cultivation of Science, Calcutta,
Raman started his career there, absolutely.
Yes.
So even the Raman Research Institute was an autonomous institute of this thing. All over, I think there are. So that's another wing of it. And of course then the headquarters, which of course looks at, do you know that when I joined, very soon we found that DST was giving grants to the universities more than what UGC was giving. Okay?
Yeah.
And it was very systematically done, thanks to my predecessors, especially Professor M.G.K. Menon, in whose regime this started. That there is a what they call Science and Engineering Research Council, SERC. You name a person today on the science scene, at one time or the other he was a member of that.
I see.
And it was elevated to such a level that the membership of the SERC, Science and Engineering Research Council, had to be approved by the Prime Minister.
I see.
Okay?
Membership.
So that's the kind of status that was given. So very eminent people, Professor C.N.R. Rao, Rodam Narasimha, your Vardharajan, M.M. Sharma, Professor Mehta from Indian Institute of Science, Bengal. All these people were at some time or the other members of the SERC.
I see.
So that was underwing. That means the DST grants is not just a grant giving just like that. Secondly, I realized that among the scientific establishments, there are establishments dealing with your Department of Space, Department of Atomic Energy, Department of Biotechnology, etc., dealing with that particular area. But what is outside these areas? For the Government of India, DST is the only nodal agency.
Okay.
When it comes to any collaborative programs from outside world, if you like, which are outside the normal domain of individual departments like atomic energy, space, etc. So when it comes to country memorandum of understanding, is normally the Secretary DST who signs it along with that. So during my time, we had these collaborations with China. I have a picture when I went to Beijing. So myself and my counterpart, who was a lady in China, signing the MOU, when their Prime Minister and our Prime Minister and our also staff is standing behind. It included even people apart from Mr. Rajiv Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi. It also included people like Narasimha Rao and so on who succeeded him.
I see.
So that is supposed to be a nodal agency for country-to-country contact in areas, in a broad spectrum of areas, like collaboration in science and technology in general. Now these are the kind of things that also happen in DST.
I see. And there is a directorate, National Council for Science and Technology Communication.
Yes.
It's basically for propagation of science.
Right.
You have some mark on that also. What did you do exactly there?
You see, you are right, there is the National Council for Science and Technology Communication, whose main objective is to popularize science,
Okay.
to bring it as down as possible to the level of common man. Now, Dr. Naren Saigal, who was the director of that time, a very eminent man, who got the UNESCO award also for science popularization.
Kalinga Award.
Kalinga Prize, that's right. Very eminent and really deeply dedicated to the cause of science and science popularization. So after I joined, I was asking him, this happened in the first few months of my joining DST. I asked Naren as to, this is NCSTC. I said, before I came, I didn't know what NCSTC has done. And I'm supposed to be a scientist, I should be knowing. But to tell you the truth, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what NCSTC stand for. So how about that? How would you remove the ignorance of people like me? Now you are removed the ignorance because I joined the department, but now how about other people? So he said, yes, what you say is right. Since you say it must be right. Since you talk about your own case. I said, how about starting something which will make people know? So what about that? So how about starting a National Science Day?
Yeah.
Okay. And we talked. And we talked about the council members and so on. And it was felt it was a good idea. So then I met the Prime Minister. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister at that time. And we went with a proposal that on the birth date of C.V. Raman, we should call it as National Science Day. So he was very receptive. But the only thing is, in the month of August, there are too many days are coming. So he said, why don't we find out some other day? And then we found out the day when Raman's first thesis paper was published, and then fixed up 28 February. But that apart. But his point was, He said, just like we have Teachers' Day
Yeah.
or we have Children's Day. So you mean shouldn't we have Scientist Day, National Scientist Day? So I said, no, I want a Science Day, National Science Day, because we believe that the Science Day should be for everybody. You don't have to be a scientist to be scientific minded.
Okay.
That's the whole idea. And that's the message we want to convey to you. So it should not be, you have on the other hand scientists who are not scientific minded, okay, who would like and probably do some puja or something to somebody. So this is not scientific. We want the scientific mindedness to percolate down to the common man. In other words, you don't have to be a scientist to be scientific minded. Common man can become so. So that's why I'm calling it a National Science Day. And he was quick to understand that, and he said that's excellent. And then we started the day. Now mind you, this is about, I forget now whether it started, yes, 87 it started.
87 it started.
And now we have completed 87 to 17 years we have completed. And because of that day, some program or the other happening, there is a recurrence about it. You know, you have a structure. What's the method of sort of reminding the people that such a structure exists? National Science Day gave us an opportunity to think that there is something like science, there are some national programs. Then as you know that we give the awards, national award, it may be just only 1 lakh. But you are a recipient of that award.
Yes.
So this is the way sort of it percolates down to people. That means every year there are so many organizations we think about. We get in touch with them to find out there is a committee. And that committee also includes, please remember this, it is under the chairmanship of Secretary DST, who is a permanent person. But there are people like N. Ram, who is the editor of Hindu. The people like me who continue to be startup members of that. So we have a good mix of people who through that method also sustain and probably flourish their own association in science. Today, if you look at Hindu, it's one of the perhaps only paper which started a page on science and technology as early as 40 years ago.
Yes.
Now it's editor. So if such a person gets involved, then he would also be able to, in a position to say who in country has done something good. He doesn't have to be a person who is awarded, doesn't have to be a Raman or C.V. Raman or Bhatnagar. But somebody who is doing some good work and requires a national level sort of awareness. What I'm trying to get at, that you need again a focal point. Which is what we try to give. You asked me about NCSTC, so this is the way probably started going about it.
I know National Science Day has really created a good atmosphere of science propagation in the country. Pune University, for example, throws open all their laboratories for
Correct.
the common person to see it.
Absolutely.
Meteorological department throws it open to common people to see
Right.
what their activities are.
Right.
You did a few more things also. You started their monthly, then you started in 1987 a Bharat Jana Vigyana Jatha,
Yes.
by which in the entire country there were a lot of programs on science and all that. So the entire credit of NCSCT goes to you for making it to vibrate. Well, Dr. Gowarikar.
Just one small addition I must do. The Bharat Jana Vigyan Jatha of 1987 was planned even before I came.
Oh, I see.
And I think the credit for that goes to people like Dr. Naren Sehgal and Praseshpal.
Okay.
I was very closely associated with that.
Ah.
But if you do want to give me a credit, I would say that, okay, even after I came, I threw my weight along with that for whatever it's worth.
Okay. Your secretaryship was over in 91, and then you were science advisor to Prime Minister for another 2 years, and then in 1993 you moved to Pune.
Yeah.
And suddenly I found one day in 1995 you landed in the shoe of Vice Chancellor of Pune University. How did it happen?
Well, to tell you the truth, while I formally retired from the government service at the age of 60 in 93, the government still put me on my toes by asking me to serve as a one-man committee to have a relook at fertilizers.
Okay.
And that work I was doing, that means I had an office and they gave me all the facilities in the Agarkar Research Institute here. And by the time I came to the point that I was going to submit the report, one-man committee report, this vice chancellorship,
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, looking back, all that I remember, one thing which is nothing private or secret, because Dr. Alexander, who was the chancellor of the university, himself made it publicly known around the time when I was about to retire. He said that Dr. Gowarikar said, when I offered him the job straight away, of a vice chancellorship, he said, won't it be better if you give the job to somebody who can serve for 5 years? Because I could serve for only 3 years. So I told him straight away that what people cannot do in 5 years, he will do it in 3 years. I'm so confident about it.
Oh.
So that was the kind of background. In other words, what I'm trying to get at, while there are formalities involved,
Yeah.
I won't say that the vice chancellorship job was sort of imposed on me. Of course, I had given the consent when somebody, but right up to the end, I wasn't really sure whether I should be really doing it. That's the point I'm trying to simply make.
But what were the reforms you could make during your tenure of vice chancellor?
What did I do?
Yeah.
What are the focal points of my regime?
Yes. Yes.
I think you should really actually ask it to the people there. I don't know what they would say about it.
Huh.
But okay, what I tried to do, I can tell you. You know, what I was thinking, like I said earlier, I always consider the university system as exists in India as basically emanating from the foreign, the Western world's system. And there was a big difference. I thought that while the other universities, the Western universities had changed maybe 25, 30, 40 years ago, we haven't changed. That's number one. The new era of globalization, which I always attribute globalization, basically globalization of education. And since the system emanating from them, today or tomorrow we had to be in line with what the world system is like. So our universities must change. They have not changed for a long time. They ought to be changing, but have not changed. If it has to happen, it must pick up such elements of their operation as are responsible to give them the status that they have, very high level, if you really look at Oxford, Cambridge and so on and so forth. So what are these elements? I was just trying to find out. So one thing that occurred to me, that first of all, the awareness that in the new era of globalization, it will be a matter of survival of the fittest. And I won't be surprised if some of the universities which are not up to the mark will collapse like the pack of cards. In my view, if they deserve to be collapsing as pack of cards, they ought to, and they should. Because now we are talking about a very different kind of society, a very different kind of education system. I, for one, who have been always the advocate of indigenousness, everything indigenous, everything internal made, etc., have a slightly different view. In my view, if the foreign universities come here and extend the kind of education that they do in their country to this country, it will be a boon. I am not talking about the social aspects of it. I am not talking about the aspects as to who can afford that education, whether that will create a crevasse between the society, etc. I am not talking about that just now. Purely on the knowledge front, if our universities can, by make collaboration, if Pune University in collaboration with some other university, Manchester or somewhere, can bring their way of teaching, basically this concept that there is nothing like a teacher and a student. The teacher has to be as much a student as the student is, and there is no difference between the two. That means what we had said, that this is the role of a student and this is the role of a teacher, that must sort of assimilate with each other. That means a teacher must constantly consider that the knowledge is changing and I must be in part of it, so he has to be as student as the student himself. Now that's the kind of thing that exists in the countries abroad. When you look at the way the students are taught in, say, MIT, there is nothing like a teacher maybe standing there and the students may be like this, but the whole way of interacting, that every period, every class, that teacher has to study for something like 4 to 5 hours before he takes one class.
Okay.
And yet he interacts at the same level as a student. You would be surprised, not many people know this, he comes with a preparation of 4-5 hours to teach a class, whereas all that he does is keeps on asking questions. And he invigorates the whole class with him. All that he does, ask something, he gives the answer, oh, is it what you think? Who agrees with that? Isn't there some problem there? So somebody would say. And you would find the next 15 to 20 minutes of his entering the class, almost every fellow sitting in that class, number maybe 50, 60, 100, has participated in the process of this, what you call education, quote unquote.
Yes.
Right? This is what ought to occur. It's not a case of somebody teaching or dictating the notes he wrote 20, 30 years ago and the student taking it down.
Yes.
What he is going to say has to come, because nothing great about it, as an answer by the process of question and answering. This ought to occur. In other words, when I say universalization of education, I mean in time to come, in every university in India, this process must come. This is a part of the methodology, if you like.
That is one, but you started the process of appraisals of the departments.
Well, that's a part of it. How do you start about it? So first of all, I found that there is nothing like an appraisal system. Okay. So what I was saying that, okay, let physics, let them apprise themselves and say what they feel like. Okay. Let them write. I'm sorry to say, vision document is the word that we used that time, a long time ago, before it became a political word. This is the department. You have been in existence for so long. You say what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses and what is the vision that you have for the next 10 years. Okay. After he writes it down, first of all he presents it to the Vice Chancellor. So Vice Chancellor gets involved with each and everything, at least to understand what the vision or the aspirations of people are, and then get experts in their areas, the names proposed by them, by each department, make a panel out of it, and you call them peers. Are you prepared to call them peers? Yes, you're prepared to call them peers. You take something like botany. Are you prepared to have H.Y. Mohan Ram as the peer for that? Everybody would say he is such a giant. He is a fellow of every academy, he is a professor, so such a long time in Delhi University Department of Botany and what have you. So if you consider this, okay, call him. Have some other people of that kind, and then you put across your vision to them and say, let them say what they want to say. Then they visit the laboratory, they see the place, they see your staff and everything, and then they say, okay, whether the things that exist today are consistent with the vision you have in mind. Okay? And if he doesn't have it, if he feels, then he can discuss and say, okay, these are the kind of things required. He make a recommendations to departmental head and to the Vice Chancellor. So when the Vice Chancellor approves these things, it doesn't become a dictatorial or it doesn't become an arbitrary kind of choice. Because after Vice Chancellor, we will have only one subject.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know about botany, he would not know about psychology and what have you. But then, through the process of peers, you really institutionalize a mechanism by which the departments need to be updated.
Okay.
And I think it played a great part in my view when today Pune University, so many departments are supposed, the NAC assessment is what it is today, quite high. I think you start the process. That's one of the things I start.
Oh, that's fine. Then you became, around that time only or maybe a little earlier, President of Jagatik Marathi Parishad, President of Marathi Vignan Parishad. You think that institutions like these are really required in our kind of society?
I will reverse the order. I will start with something like Marathi Vignan Parishad, of which you have been for a long time secretary. Yes, if I look at Marathi Vignan Parishad, people may or may not know about what it achieved. But I shudder to think what the science in this Maharashtra would be if Marathi Vignan Parishad were not there. There are certain things which you have to see only in a very reserved kind of way. Today, Marathi Vignan Parishad has its chapters almost in all districts of Maharashtra, maybe out of 30, maybe 25, 26. But in some districts, you have more than one chapter there. The task of science popularization, I think ultimately that's what I would like to consider, has been facilitated, will continue to be facilitated, and will continue to be facilitated in much more force in time to come, in my view. You may call yourself NGO. There are NGOs and NGOs. But I'm talking about Marathi Vigyan Parishad, they call NGO or otherwise. I think its task is very important. Its existence is very important because it's doing a fantastic job. Now, if you look at structure like Jagatik Marathi Parishad, it's a slightly different kettle of fish. I was the third president after Kusumagraj and P.L. Deshpande, Pula Deshpande. And when I was the president, about 3-4 years of it, I looked upon it as an opportunity to put across, as a scientist, as to how science can become, or is in fact so, a part of the society. But you can't have a situation like science and society, what used to be a very popular thing at one time, as if two are separate and nothing to do with each other. Like Yashpal used to say, when he's talking about science in society, I thought here is a forum available where I can put across the ideas. Today, if you really look at it, the whole life full of what you may call science. We are talking to each other, it's being recorded on the radio. Nothing of this thing is possible. It's going to be broadcast to all over Maharashtra or wherever. So science has become so much an integral part of us, and yet probably even in an area like, say, literature, I would like to see some scene which advanced countries also have. If you look at some of the bestsellers like, say, Airport, The Airport, okay? What is it all about? That man who writes, he's not scientist per se,
Yes.
correct? Arthur Clarke. But he went and studied inside out of airport functioning. Probably he knows much more as one single man than any one fellow sitting in that airport complex. He picked up the material, he converted it into such lucid stories, fascinating stories, stories full of emotions, stories full of stress. In other words, the dramatization of what the life is all about, its different components. He puts it together on the whole background of the airport, which is purely science and technology. Right? Tell me, is there one such book in any Indian regional language you can think of comparable to airport? Now, my own feeling was, this doesn't start all of a sudden. You should have a movement behind. The movement whereby you show how science gets integrated with society, how it has become part of it totally. And in fact, the life without science, or the society without science, would be what the primitive society would be like. You have to put it across, like what the English literature has done. Such a huge thing, 800 pages, 700-800 pages, it reads like a novel. And that's why you have such a bestsellers. Every time he writes, it becomes a bestseller. I think that kind of trend ought to occur here. And if it has to occur, then you need to create this kind of awareness, not at one point, not just at Marathi Vigyan Parishad, Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad or something, but it has to happen on different scores. And I think that's the kind of idea I have in mind.
Oh, very good. While you were on the topic of novels and stories and all that, it reminded me that you are a many-faceted person. And then during your young age, you wrote some stories. And some 10 years back, you edited one Diwali number also.
Yes, I did. I'm very fascinated by literature that I read. I always get a strong desire to write. I'm not a very fast writer.
Okay.
But you are absolutely right. I wrote the first story, I think it was in 1949-50, something of that kind. There used to be a very popular magazine at that time called Vasant in Marathi. I sent them a story, I think in 49-50, something of that kind. After a year and a half, maybe after a year, I got a letter from them that they accepted the story for publication. And in 1952 June, that story was published. Okay? I said two things. In the same Vasant magazine, June 1952, there are also, along with my stories in the same issue, stories written by Mr. Gangadhar Gadgil, a very famous Marathi writer, and Mr. Arvind Gokhale, very famous person, Pubha Bhave, P.B. Bhave, another very, very famous person in Marathi. And yet, I don't feel like reading that, my story. But that time, that story fascinated me. And it took some 3-4 years. Then thereafter, my progress was faster. Yes, I wrote. I liked writing in Marathi. Later on, of course, the time came when I got involved in something else. But even today, I get fascinated when it comes to writing for the Times of India or Indian Express or something like that. If an idea occurs to me, then my mind is full of that and feel like putting across. In other words, yes, I get fascinated by writing. I feel like writing.
You were a column writer in Times of India Pune supplement?
Yes. I used to write when they started the Education Times. People came to me, and that time it was going to be published once in a fortnight. They said, we want to start with your column called My Word. And they said, wherever the Education Times comes, they don't have such thing. We wanted to start something in Pune because Pune is the educational capital of India. So I said, okay, let me just start. Let me give you a start, and then you find out somebody else. But then they did not leave me. I wrote about 2.5 years or so. That column, yes. Later on, after 6 months, 9 months or so, it became every week. Yes, and it was, yes, people used to enjoy reading it, so I hear.
Since the time you went to Delhi in 1986, you started getting a global view and you started expressing yourself by variety of ways, by way of your public speeches, maybe convocation speeches, maybe writing articles and all that. And you have expressed yourself vociferously on variety of subjects. One of them that fascinated me, you said that India has lot of monsoon water and then we are not storing it. So we must store more water, we must generate more electricity, then India can become superpower one day. Now, what is this theory all about?
Yes, I always find that the scientists ought to be bolder than what they are. They tend to get into their shell, and I think on matters of public interest, like I said, like Sarabhi, people like Sarabhi used to do, they must, I think, express themselves clearly. They must express the pros and cons of an issue. And they should not be shy about expressing it. What you say is right. Now look at the situation. This country is one of the wettest regions of the world. Okay, and yet every time there is a monsoon is over in a couple of months, we have to carry the water by tankers. I think there is nothing more shameful than this. You get so much of water, 85% of the water goes to sea. I think we should hang our head in shame when we see something of that kind. So obviously, if you get so much, what about countries like Africa, I say, they don't get. India is fortunate that in the last 100 years, your monsoon never ever fails totally. At worst, except for 1 year or 2 years, even in the worst drought situation, India still had 80% of the normal monsoon. What more is required? In countries like Africa, where the monsoon fails, it fails totally 100%. We are not like that. So, my feeling is, with so much of abundance of water, we can't manage it. You look at a country like United States, 100 years ago, they set up the mechanism, they created the large storages, small storages, without bothering about large or small. So they are never ever, the country expanded, the population increased, the needs increased, they never had to carry the tanker, water by tanker. They still are sumptuous about this water. This country, in my view, must store every drop of water. What Anna Hazare and people like them are saying, I am totally with him. How you do it in a matter of details. Today, if on 15% water you want this country to live, I'm just saying that even if you do say 50%, 50%, if you store that water will be enough for you at least for 2 complete years. If you really look at the monsoon pattern, you will find that out of 10 years, 7 years are of good monsoon. Normal, above normal, that kind of thing. 3 years we can say bad monsoon. And when I say bad monsoon, nothing worse than 80%. Okay? So in this situation, people are still living, maybe by tanker water or whatever. Why the hell we should have that kind of thing? Why can't we have 50%? If you have 50%, you will have sufficient water for the entire country, even if the monsoon fails the next year. So 2 years, 2.5 years enough water. There is no other country again where you had these two kind of, you have the 80% of southwest monsoon, 20% coming out of northeast. There are many places where 2 monsoons like Kerala. You have southwest monsoon as well as the northeast monsoon. With such abundance of water, being one of the wettest countries of the world, why should we not be storing the water? Point is as simple as that. Obviously, when you have storages, then you must make sure that the people who are ousted, who are displaced because of that, have to be properly taken care of, like anything else. But you can't say that because the people are not being properly taken care of, you don't have the storage water. I'm saying you must have the storage as well as taking care of whosoever is displaced for that. Do you find any illogic in this?
No, nothing. In fact, America's population is 25% of that of India. And their storage capacity is 5 times.
Absolutely.
And that is where the money comes, the wealth generates.
They store 750 cubic kilometers of water.
Yes. As compared to 166 or 186 of India.
And we still have 186. Now it has increased slightly more. And like you said, 4 times the population.
Yes.
And 1/4 the storage of water.
In fact, with so much less storage of water, we have turned out a green revolution.
Yes.
We are self-sufficient in our granary in spite of that. That means if we store entire water that we get out of monsoon, we can export grains to other countries in a big way. Not only that, India has a potential to export even water.
Yes.
While we are on the monsoon, there is a monsoon model named after you. You are not Vasan Gowarikar, you are a Varun Dev Gowarikar.
I don't know about that. Okay, I mentioned to you about creating the focal points when I was the secretary DST, Department of Science and Technology. I could see that many of the things that DST was doing or ought to be doing were not properly recognized. Sometimes it has something to do with the tendency or the mentality of the people. You look at the meteorological community. My own experience has been meteorological community has been a very subdued, low profile people all across the world and certainly in India. If you criticize them, they are oceans of knowledge. In India, I have found the meteorology community in India is comparable to any meteorologist anywhere else. Okay? And yet, every organization has a culture. Space people may be more forthright speakers than something else. It's a part of their culture.
Yes.
Atomic energy. These people are very low profile people. They're easily misunderstood. Now, when I took over the secretaryship of DST and meteorology was a major part of it, I began to sort of take interest in that. Prime Minister also has said, do something for meteorology, etc., etc. Then I found that what was really lacking to start with was really projecting them the way that they are. Not doing a public relation exercise, but at least people know about their strength. And this ought to be done because I found 2 things. We used to get at that time forecasts from the Americans. Okay, 86. The forecast that we got from the Prime Minister's office, they write directly to the Prime Minister, saying that India will have a normal monsoon. Okay, it was a bad monsoon. 87, they said good monsoon, slightly below average, but still normal. It turned out to be one of the worst monsoon years of the century. This is all coming from United States. Some fellows, some university writing here and so on. So I was saying that look at this. first of all talking about forecast about India's monsoon the way that it is, then we have much better weather. So we had an internal discussion, we collated the knowledge that they had, and out of that came, purely by the process of questions and answers, we used to sit the whole night quite a few times, came out this monsoon model. 1988 again came a forecast saying that just about average monsoon from the Americans, whereas when we did, we correlated, we tried to see what our model, how it forecasts in the past, for the past 25, 30, 35 years, we found that 1988 was going to be the best monsoon, one of the best monsoons years. We made a presentation to the Prime Minister. He was so excited about it. I said, why don't you tell the nation? Just, okay. Now remember that this monsoon year was supposed to be by the American forecast just about.
Okay.
But we thought it was going to be an excellent monsoon. So as per this thing, we made a presentation and we showed the chart. We said what the basis of our forecast. And it turned out to be one of the best monsoon years of the century. Thereafter, the Americans stopped sending the forecast to the Prime Minister's office and to us. That's where I thought that the major department of the major constituent of the Department of Science and Technology, namely the Meteorology, India Meteorological Department, in this kind of thing, you get disproportionate create and disproportionate discrete also. In the whole IMD structure of maybe 9,000-10,000 people, how many people do you think are concerned with the monsoon forecast? Maybe 15, 20, 25? So when the forecast was not as it should have been, the whole place was damned. And as the forecast began to come correct, the whole name of IMD
Yes.
sort of got good focus.
Yes. Shining.